welcome to the TDS Talking Early Years podcast. Now, each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe who offer exclusive insights, some inspiration, and a lot of guidance that helps practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years. Hello and welcome back to TDS Talking Early Years with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and my guest, Ben Kingston-Hughes. And in all of our episodes, we've been talking about the importance of play, and we've covered lots of ground. But Ben, you started in episode 1 by saying you do a lot of work with vulnerable children. So it'd be really interesting in this episode just to dip into the role that play plays in supporting the well-being and learning of those children and how we can apply that also to all children in our settings.
Well, for us, it is the main approach that we would work with all of our children, because it genuinely changes lives. And it's week in, week out. And even, as I'm getting older, there'll be sessions where I have to set off at 5 a.m. and I'm miserable and I'm an old bloke who's moaning about his job, even though it's genuinely the best job in the world. But then it's almost every session, something will happen with a child that, who's been through more in their short life than I could even imagine. I mean, I had an idyllic childhood growing up. Then you'll see a moment of play where just genuine magic happens, where that child becomes themselves. And our unwritten remit for our whole organisation is actually just giving children back their childhood, because that's what's been taken away from a child. And the key thing that they don't have is those playful interactions with either other children or with other adults. And that's what my team are there for. And all my team are handpicked. They are people who already work with children, have loads of experience, and they're there just to give play. We don't have a therapeutic remit. We don't have an educational remit on many of our sessions. Occasionally we do. It's purely just to give that child a chance to play. But it's through that we see the most incredible therapeutic outcomes for those children. And it is genuinely powerful.
I think children as well, obviously it seems to be innate in human beings, this and other mammals, this idea that play, and we learn a lot about how we exist as humans through our playful interactions with others. But again, for lots of vulnerable children, and we were a foster family for about 7 or 8 years and had a number of children that we had over that time. And again, a lot of them had very different background experiences, a lot of quite high level trauma. But one thing that a lot of them lacked was not just the opportunities to play, but the other playful people in their lives. Yeah. And also if you're dealing with a lot of trauma, or if you are young and you are trying to process things you don't understand. So for children who are in our early years settings who are not necessarily in those positions of vulnerability, but might have things occur in their lives, like the death of a family member, the death of a pet, or even just going to somebody's wedding or an event that occurs that's not a usual event that your brain has got to process. Play is one of the best mechanisms for allowing children to revisit in a safe space things that they don't understand and try and reinterpret that. But what they need are ideally the adults who can support them in that playful interpretation.
What we do a session called an adoption activity day, which is actually a weird session. It's one of our most unusual ones because it's a way to find forever families for children that have been passed over for adoption. So genuinely, there's some children who statistically it's harder to find a forever family for. If you've got a disability, for instance, Down syndrome, it just means that you're statistically harder to find that forever family. And up until a few years ago, that would have been long-term fostering. But we do an event now where it is just play, and our remit is purely play. We don't have any other remit. But whilst that's going on, and we do den making, we do magic potions, we run around outdoors, but adopters can join in. And if they are sat in a den with a little girl with Down syndrome and they're making a magic potion together, they're not seeing the Down syndrome anymore. What they're seeing is that child. And it's created more forever families than any other project that's ever been tried. So the reason I'm saying that is because obviously some of the children that we work with are incredibly vulnerable because of their life experiences. So there's a period at the beginning where there's 20 minutes, half an hour, when the children feel really a little bit unsure of themselves. But we're really good, our team, at getting those children to feel not just they're safe with us, but actually permission to play. But we did one just before Christmas, and the children ran in, and it was like water flowing into the cracks. They ran straight up to all our kit. They pulled the dinosaurs out of the big dinosaur box, and it was like they played instantly. So the next week we had a meeting because we thought, what was it that was different? Why did we not have that 20 minutes?
Yeah.
And there are lots of factors, but the main factor was that I'd got a new staff team And for some reason, when the children came in, they were all lying on the floor, actually lying in amongst the kit, playing with it themselves.
Yeah.
And because they were doing that, the other volunteers who worked for the other agencies had kind of, they'd realised, thought that was what they were supposed to do. So every adult was already playing. And instead of the 20 minutes of children looking around going, oh, I don't know what to do, it was instant. And that was the main difference. And obviously there are other factors, but it's just playful adults being on the child's level already, lying there and in amongst all the bricks and all the dinosaurs, playing around with the dinosaurs, making dens. Those children just flowed in despite the fact that they were extremely vulnerable. So it was a really interesting one. And I know you can't guarantee that's going to happen every time, but it's certainly worth bearing in mind.
Again, that's kind of like the playful attitude that we talked about in the last podcast, the fact that if the adults bring an element of play, and again, adults bringing an element of play can be anything from actually playing or just bringing that kind of open atmosphere of like, here, this is great, this is what's going to happen. Yeah. And also, if you've got children who have been on high alert for a lot of their life, and so they are constantly in that kind of state of fight or flight because they're not quite sure what's going to happen, or children for whom chaos is their norm. So what children tend to do is try and recreate what feels normal, even if normal isn't good. Play is really good at knocking down some of those barriers and also helping them to open up a little bit in ways that they struggle to do in everyday interactions.
Yeah, and that's why sort of play therapy works so well with children. It's got a very unique capacity display to bring down the effect of the amygdala, the fear center of the brain, for instance. So that child that's already on heightened alert, fight or flight, simply by playing, you're automatically lessening the effect of the amygdala. If you're then playing with adults they feel safe with, that nurturing experience, that shared safety, that is a double whammy because that brings it down even further. And we now know that children that are stimulated in terms of their active curiosity, we now know that has a potential to bring down. So this is what we do, is play, nurturing and curiosity in a nutshell with every child that we work with, whether that's a child who's been through bereavement or a child who's been through physical abuse, etc. We're basically helping that child to bring their own brain under control. And that's when you see the wonderful stuff happening.
Yeah, and I think the really interesting word for me there, and they're all interesting, but is that curiosity element, the fact that you want to provide resources that allow children to be curious. Yeah. And some of those will be resources that are familiar, maybe like your dinosaurs, maybe like, but then there are other resources or adults who are able to interpret resources in such a way that make them curious resource, because that drive, that curious drive to find out more, to touch, to feel, to interact with, that is what releases all of those really positive hormones and chemicals in your body that really helps you with that play.
Yeah, and this is something we use. We use a lot of loose parts, which we talked about in the first podcast, a lot of cardboard boxes. Weirdly, we have to buy cardboard boxes now. We get through so many, I can't get them for free. So I went to a removal firm that's near me, and their slogan that's on all the boxes is removing your stress.
Excellent.
And with some of our children's groups, we have children, a selectively mute group of children who won't speak at all because of, and it's adults that have done that to. But actually, when they're sat in a cardboard box den, that's when they'll talk to us if we're in the den too. And yet, every den has got the words "removing your stress" on it. So that's a really nice touch. But yeah, it is about that freedom to explore. And what we found over the years is that for some groups, we just dump the stuff and we go for it. And of course, you'll have people going, aren't you going to tell them what to do? And we go, of course not. But for our most vulnerable children's groups, we actually, we do half-build stuff. So that instead of running in and seeing a pile of cardboard boxes, they're not instantly going to look at that and see possibilities. So we'll build half a Stonehenge or half a den. We'll put the dinosaurs out on the scooter boards with a bit of stuff tied to them so they know they can pull them around on it. So it's giving them the ideas, but it's that permission. So they run in and they see that and go, oh, I can do this. Whereas some groups will just see the bag of material
and know what to do.
Instantly know what to do. But
we talked about that in our first episode, that idea that you need to give children freedom to explore. But if you're feeding that imagination or you're feeding their experience, if you walk in and see a box and you've got no idea what a box could be, because nobody's sat in a box and made it a car then as adults, you need to scaffold around that. But it's that fine line that you get through just experimentation and play between, right, we're all in a box and it's a car and the car is going to London to visit the Queen of Buckingham Palace, or this is a box, it could be a car, could be a plane, could be a train, could be a house. And then suddenly you're sowing that seed of, well, this could be.
Yeah, possibilities. That's what
Yeah,
the children. And interestingly, just modern attachment theory says that children who have insecure attachments are less likely to explore their environment, and that's going back right to Harlow's monkeys, and they won't explore because of that lack of safety. So it's all connected. That the adult staff making the child feel fundamentally safe, but by being on the floor playing, then already the child is starting to see that. And there's a lovely little snippet of attachment theory that sounds a bit weird, but it's that a lot of children that we work with automatically assume that adults are a source of fear. They have to go through a realization, and it's the simple realization is that, hang on a minute, they're not like other grown-ups. They've got to realize that they're not the same as the grown-ups that have caused them pain. They've got to realize they're different. And one of the best ways you can do that is be playful. It's by far the most effective way. If you're there with a silly thing on your head, running around playing with a dinosaur, or being a superhero yourself, the children are going, wow, she's not like other grown-ups, or he's not like other grown-ups. So,
but I was chatting to some adults about just the other day, as we do, and talking about the fact that if you've ever been in a relationship with another adult that went very wrong, and your trust was completely undermined by something they said, did, or something they said and did, it's really hard for us, and lots of adults will say it, to trust another man, another woman again, another whatever it may be. And if you can do that as an adult who's had a fairly balanced life of reasoning, and you've got a lot of good support around you, and you struggle emotionally to trust those relationships again, if you're talking about a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old who's been severely let down by a number of adults their entire life, it's like that times 100. So of course they're going to struggle. And therefore, you're right, that idea of finding someone to trust again is when somebody comes along and you think in your head, oh, you're not like the other people I've been out with, or whatever it may be. That makes you different. And that's our role as educators, to be that different adult.
Yeah, and I think the members of my staff who get that, they're the ones who, honestly, genuine magic happens. One of the staff I used to have, who weirdly left working early years, even though she was the most amazing worker, because it was too stressful with too low pay, and she got family to feed, and that was heartbreaking. But she would wear a skin-tight yellow bodysuit on some of our, and we didn't provide that. That's not our uniform. That she had, and she became Banana Lady, and it was like the Pied Piper. Children that were genuinely vulnerable children would just follow her around, talking to her. Children wouldn't volunteer any conversation with another adult, but there they are talking to Banana Lady because she's clearly not like
different. Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be the wild and wacky stuff. You can be a different sort of grown-up by just listening to a child, or just being the one that doesn't appear threatening or is there for them. And I think presence and attentiveness have got a huge role to play in that, is that having time for the child. So I love my members of staff who are bonkers and running around being superheroes, but at the same time, you don't have to be like that to be that different sort of grown-up.
Absolutely. And I think we've said all the way along about like playful spaces and playful adults, and yes, play can be all out there, but also playfulness can be a glance, it can be a gesture, it can be, so there are loads of ways that you can be playful that don't necessarily mean that you have to be doing the big stuff, but the big stuff also can really help to disarm children. It can really help to kind of create a moment. One of the things we found really interesting when we were working with very vulnerable children was that often they needed some coaching through play and to break through those barriers of, can I trust you to, because play can be quite vulnerable for children because they're putting themselves in an open position. But what we often found out, I've also seen this in settings, is that when children are really comfortable and they're also trying to make sense of the world, lots of stuff comes out. And sometimes that's just stuff about, I mean, we all will say in early years, you know way more about children's parents than you probably should do because they just tell you everything. But often in play, you will see vulnerabilities, you'll see insecurities, and sometimes you might see trauma that leaks out again, or not even leaks, is deliberately replayed to try and make sense. So I think for people listening to this, there's loads of good stuff. But one of the things you need to be aware of, which is a positive, is that this could happen during play. And
so children, if they're playing mummies and daddies, for instance, if they're arguing and fighting with each other, it is one way in which they're dealing with that. So social dramatic plays are really important. Sorry, carry on.
No, I was going to say it is. I mean, I often talk about a setting I was in where a child was playing dead granddad, and that was, he was making his friends lie in fruit boxes and lie still, and every time they moved, he just shouted, lie still. and the adult said, "Oh, this is really interesting what you're playing," and he just said, "Oh, we're playing Dead Granddad," and then as an adult, she was a bit flawed in terms of, "Oh, that's nice,"
Yeah.
but it's just part of exploring that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think play is much broader than people think it is. It is a unique function that actually brings in all of children's social development, their understanding of the world around them. That's how they explore concepts. And like you said earlier, through concepts such as death, but also humor, concepts such as their interpersonal relationship with people that they like, people that they don't like as well. And it's through play that children explore their entire world. And if you've got supportive, playful adults on that journey, it makes all the difference in the world. If you haven't, it makes navigating your world much more difficult.
Yeah. It is a complex thing that we talked about. I mean, again, in these short episodes, there is loads of your work, which is brilliant all around play, and the new book you've just produced, where people can go and find out lots more about the things that we've talked about. Play, I think we have clearly said, is something that children need to be able to help them to grow and develop into successful adults who are going to be curious and resilient, but also things that adults need and can use as a really powerful tool for their own mental health and well-being, but also to support the development of children.
Yeah, and this is the reason why I wrote the books, is because I've seen it. And 34 years I think I've been working with children, and it got to the point where I was so fed up of justifying what we do. And I'm sure you'll agree with this, but I think that play can look silly. It can look frivolous. And then because of that, it's undervalued. And there are people in this country who don't value mental health. Again, you'll have encountered these people who don't seem to think, the kind of attitude where they go, oh, they just need to toughen up a bit. Where we know from every shred of research that giving children negative experience does not toughen them up. It's the absolute opposite. So we know all this, but yet still educationalists or people making policy go, we don't even see what mental health is. So I started learning neuroscience purely as ammunition. And that led to the first book on plays, because if you can show pictures of the brain and go, no, this is what it's doing to the brain. But on that journey, it took me through life expectancy. Play is a key mechanism for turning vulnerable mammals into strong, healthy adults. It's all the way through mental health and emotional well-being, in terms of genetics, in terms of changing future generations. And it was a hell of a journey, which led to the book being called A Very Unusual Journey into Play. And then, the second book was just because there's not enough joy in people's lives, and it's an undervalued concept. So I wrote an entire book about why children need joy. And again, it's the neuroscience and the biochemistry. So,
absolutely. And I think what we're fundamentally saying is that play could be the recipe that underpins a huge amount of success for all of us. And we all need more play and playful learning in our lives.
Yeah. Well, one final thought is when we do our parent play training, we don't call it training because they don't turn up if you call it that. But get emails from the adults saying that by playing more with our children, our whole family is happier. The mental health of the whole family improves if we just spend an extra 10 minutes playing, or an extra 20 minutes in the park, or whatever it takes. And nobody's asking anyone to be superhuman, because as a parent, you can't play all the time. Of course you can't. But just increasing it a little bit, we get emails from loads of parents saying, we are better as a family now because we play more together.
Absolutely. And on that note, Ben Kingston-Hughes, thank you for all of your input into these 4 podcast episodes. They have been fascinating. And I know I say this a lot, but we literally could have just talked all day. But for now, hopefully you can come back again and chat some more. Ben Kingston-Hughes, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to our guest today, Ben, for joining us and providing such valuable insights into play. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and Ben Kingston-Hughes. And if you've been inspired by our conversation today, then don't forget, you can sign up via the link in our episode notes and be the first to hear about future episodes, and also access exclusive follow-up content, which will include ideas for your settings and lots of links to relevant resources.